This is News and Views with me, Julie Ali, right here on Salam Media. A big event happening once again by the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. We do have the executive director at the foundation, and that is Neeshan Balton. We're talking about Anti-Racism Week. Let's understand why 27 years into our democracy, we're still having to have these discussions, and what this week is going to look like, and what are the type of messages we're going to be giving out there. And obviously, Neeshan is the executive director. He was an activist as well. We want to see how things have changed and how we need to continue persevering with these discussions to have a mindset change and get our young people realize what our parents and grandparents fought for and how we need to carry this legacy through. Neeshan Balton, a very good morning to you. Welcome to the program. Nice having you on air, and also great to hear that these initiatives are ongoing. But you heard my statement. Why is it still necessary for us to be having these discussions?
Good morning and greetings to all your viewers and listeners. Well, because the problems that this week seeks to address still exist and will continue to exist for decades to come. The issue of racism in South Africa and across the world won't disappear and haven't disappeared in 27 years. Because one, they have a history of over 300 years of existence in this country, and perhaps longer in different parts of the world. Racism is entrenched in much of the psyche of South Africa. I would argue that it is embedded in the DNA of South Africa. It's integral to everything that we do, from where we live to where we die, what we eat, with who we associate with, what we learn, and defines a lot of who we are on a day-to-day basis. It the question presupposes that racism should have disappeared in 1994, whereas what 1994 really was an opportunity for us to define a new South Africa and to start the work towards achieving that new South Africa. That work is underway, but it will continue for decades to come. If you take a place like America, where this issue has been endemic there for over 300 years, and you would have seen the Black Lives Matter movement in the last few years, indicating that even there, a problem like this is still very prevalent. You've seen different manifestations of this, I would argue, in places like India, which was once a secular state, and today, in many ways, practices much of the divisions that are very similar to what the apartheid policies were here. So, racism is something that will be embedded in the minds of many. Sometimes it will appear as if it has disappeared, and on many occasions will come to the surface when the opportunities are right, as we've seen in South Africa in different schools and different communities, and as we're currently seeing around the issue of xenophobia. So it will be a problem that is there until we develop the tools, the mindset, and the actions that are required to challenge it and to eradicate it.
Okay, so what sort of conversations, what's going to happen in this coming week regarding the anti-racism week? Uh, that's the one issue. And then the other issue as well is we know that racism is, never mind South Africa or America, it seems to be endemic around the world. We just have to look at what's playing out in the Ukraine and who's allowed to go through the borders to safety. Whites first, blacks were right at the end of the queue or totally forgotten. We're seeing situations around the Western world opening their arms to white Ukrainians. And yet, in other parts of the world, racism and oppression still is absolutely persistent. But having said that, when we look at South Africa, taking our country, when we talk racism, we're talking of a small minority, a minute amount of white people that are in the country. And obviously, 90 odd percent of, when we look at the demographics, obviously, is Black people. Let's look at that picture of racism. And bringing into the discussion, let's also look at how corruption and the rich and poor divide plays into the idea of racism. Do we just use this racist card to perhaps, I don't know, highlight the wrongs in the country? Should we be looking at the deeper problems? Is it corruption that is adding to our woes?
Yeah, you're asking so many questions at the same time. It's difficult to keep track of which ones you actually want to have answered, but
All of
I'll
them,
try. Yeah,
all
yeah.
of the above,
For,
because they're
for the
so
week,
interlinked. They're so interlinked, Nishan,
yeah,
that
yeah.
you kind of wonder, where do you start addressing it? Do you start at point A, or do you go right to the bottom of the queue? Where and how do you start addressing it to address this issue?
No, no, I agree, and because a lot of them are interconnected, sometimes it makes it so complex and difficult to come to the point of where you must actually start. But let me try and answer some of the things. The focus for Anti-Racism Week has been around a call for people to unite and act against racism, xenophobia, and all other intolerances in South Africa. Uh, and the reason for this, we've seen a lot of calls for unity against racism and xenophobia. What we haven't really seen is the required action to deal with some of these problems. Now, action is not necessarily just going into the streets. So let me give you an example. You have a place like Senegal that 2 years ago or more was almost at war with itself across race. Fortunately, sanity prevailed. Some leaders across race decided that they had more in common and needed to find the issues that they could bring people together around in their town. Today, I'm told people there across race would fix up potholes, would fix up traffic lights, but also will be starting to do the work that holds politicians in that area accountable for what they are meant to be doing. Uh, so dealing with issues of racism sometimes requires boldness, sometimes requires decisive leaderships, and also identifying the issues around which people can act. In this week, we are looking at some of those things. We will be focusing on Tuesday on the issues of racism in sport. We have the former West Indies cricketer Michael Holding doing a virtual conversation in the evening with a number of other panelists, because here we want to pick up on the work that Cricket South Africa has started through its nation building project, and to see how that applies as a solution to many of the other codes of sports. If this applies, how others will in fact begin to take it up, and that is solution orientated. Um, the we will join with the Department of Justice in its conference in the week to review the World Conference Against Racism and how much of progress has been made. In that conference, we're likely to also see how far the country has come in its development of a national action plan to combat racism, because finally this is a plan that government has put onto the table with wider civil society, and we now need to unpack how that plan needs to be implemented. And in that plan, I think are very practical steps about what different role players need to be doing. Uh, the Constitutional Hill hosts a human rights festival from the 19th to the 21st. At that festival, there's a number of conversations, dialogues, and actions dealing with the issues of race and racism uh, that the foundation will be engaging with, in which a whole range of other partner organizations are there. On the 21st, we are supporting calls for the day to be dedicated to action against xenophobia. The foundation will be participating in the march that takes place in the city center of Joburg through Hillbrow and other places, because we think that this is the biggest issue that we need to be dealing with in Human Rights Month, and that is, in my view, is a racist practice, albeit that the victims of this racism are Black Africans. Uh, so when you talk about the Ukraine, yes, I think we must condemn the anti-black, the anti-African, the anti-black racism that that we've seen there and in places like Poland and others. But we must also acknowledge that there were Ukrainians and Polish and Romanians who, in fact, enabled people to cross over, and not paint it as if it was the entire population that took that particular position. But when we see the attacks on Black Africans in places like Poland and others, we need to draw the links between that, the similarities between what was happening there and what is happening in campaigns like Operation Dudula in this country, because it's one and the same thing. Uh, Deciding that people don't have a place here and that they need to be kicked out, and without following the due processes that are required. Issues of corruption, maladministration, and so forth, uh, I would argue, feed into narratives and stories of Black incompetence, and that gets used by people who have racist mindset to say that we told you that a Black government will never be able to run this country. So it helps those who already have a very racist mindset, but it's not as if corruption is an issue of racism uh, in South Africa. And I think we must separate them out. Although the major victims of corruption and state capture in this country are really Black and poor people who now don't have the train services that they would have had previously, who don't have access to the hospitals that they would have had previously, whereas the more better off in society have other options to use those services for. Um, so corruption has, I think, the effects of impacting on the majority Black people in this country, not caused, however, by racist intentions by its perpetrators, because the perpetrators of racism, are non-racial. They cut across all race and religion, as we've seen in the various reports of the Zondo Commission. So I hope I've answered the different aspects of the questions that you've posed.
Brilliantly. Thank you very much for that. And I know we're talking Anti Racism Week. My question to you, I have two questions before I let you go. The question is, how can the general public get involved here? Also, this whole issue around racism, I think these conversations and Racism Week must be, I hope, you have actually activated that these type of conversations happen at school levels as well. And the issue around xenophobia, I can see it troubles you as much as it troubles the rest of us as South Africans, but that talks directly to the issue of unemployment. And again, and that links in with corruption, does it not? And until and unless we as South Africans do not address that situation, the situation of the high levels of unemployment in the country, unfortunately, we're not going to be seeing this anti immigrant sentiment that is currently playing out in the country, Operation Dudula, and so forth.
No, thank you very much. Let me say on the issues of schools, we will in this week reach out to probably around 20,000 young people
Wow.
in school visits, assemblies against racism. Today, I think we did about 6 or 7 this very morning, and that continues throughout the week. Had the civil aviation authorities not grounded Kulula and British Airways, Chester Missing was going to do some big activations at schools on behalf of this campaign, but he
Okay.
can't get down from Cape Town. Uh, and that's work that will continue throughout the week. I mean, throughout the year. What we're also hoping in this year is to work with various authorities to ensure that there is some framework to deal with racism in schools, some policy guidelines, and some action that would that in guidelines on how to deal with issues of racism in schools, both in the curriculum, both in teaching practices, as well as social attitudes amongst learners, because that kind of work it has been ignored significantly, and we only tend to become aware of it when there's an outbreak in 1 or 2 schools in the country, and then we talk about the issue until the next big headline comes. Um, the How can people get involved? Um, the website of the foundation is issued, I think, guidelines on what it is that members of the public can do. And fundamental to this is really start to learn seriously about what is racism, what are its roots. There's some incredible work coming out from across the world that talks about the contribution of the African continent to science, history, and to development that challenges, I think, the normal stereotype that Africa has been a backward continent, from time immemorial. So, one, I think we need to understand our history. We need to become aware of racism in its new forms, particularly social media. Uh, Thirdly, is to understand what it is that people can do when they experience this or observe it. Understand how to use instruments like the Equality Court, the Human Rights Commission, and others, and to really take that step. When you see something wrong that is racist, report it and act on it. Um, I think the last point, yes, xenophobia is linked to the issues of poverty, but I think the issues of poverty are exploited by those who want to use the issue of xenophobia for very narrow purposes. And I would conclude to say, watch that the 2024 elections, this issue of migrants in the country will become a campaigning issue for those who want to get into political office, not because they want to deal with the issue, but because they will exploit the issue because it gives them prominence, and that prominence is what they hope to then use to get votes and get into office. And you've seen how this was used by Trump successfully in his presidential campaigns, and even while he was president, to remain in the popular kind of support base that he had. So there might well be linkages, but those linkages don't necessarily have to move into the form of violence and intimidation that we are seeing currently. Um, and I can only hope that that people become aware of just how the issue is being exploited for very narrow political purposes, and should not be supported.
Nishan Bolton, always a pleasure talking to you. And I throw a whole host of questions at you because I like picking your brain and I know that you're up to it and you'll give me as good as I put out to you. Love talking to you always. A wonderful, successful anti racism week. I look forward to all of your future campaigns, and I do hope that you can join us on a more regular basis. And what I would love most of all is to have Chester Missing on this show talking about what he's rolling out at the schools. So maybe you can make it happen, inshallah.
We
Till the
will
next
try.
time is till the next time is always go well and nice talking.
Thanks, Julie. Thank you. Bye.
It is 9:46 exactly. That was Neeshan Balton. He is the executive director at the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, talking Anti-Racism Week. Still to come on the show, we will be talking with Virginia Kepler, CEO of Ria Tusa We Help, and also the family spokesperson of the Callahans, about the most outrageous atrocities happening at a frail care center in Crosby, Johannesburg.